This is the Digital Marketing Experts Podcast episode. No, why am I trying to sound like a radio announcer? Experts in the Wire, episode 52. Mark Johnstone. Hey everyone, welcome to episode 52 of Experts on the Wire. My guest today wrote a post on Moz a few weeks ago that caught quite a bit of attention from the SEO community. It was actually a response to a prior post on Moz by a guy by the name of Tomas V. Sorry, Thomas, I don't know how to pronounce your last name. It was called The SEO Myth of Going Viral. You see, Mark used to work for the agency Distilled, doing SEO, content marketing. At his time there, he was responsible for content ideas that got over 1,000 linking root domains. 1,000. Those are the most extreme and successful results, but even on average, his content ideas received 40 to 50 links per piece of content. But is that success? Did those links actually cause an attributable increase in rankings, traffic, and revenue? Tomas V didn't think so. That's why he wrote the post, and that's why Mark wrote a response to Thomas's post on Moz, and that's what Mark is here to rebut against today and discuss. He reveals exactly how all those links happened, which is great just alone. That's going to give you some link acquisition tactics. But even better, although he's not with Distilled anymore, Mark followed up with some of his former clients to find out, did the work they do actually help? Did they see results? And if that's not enough, Mark also shares some brilliant content and ideation strategies. So you'll definitely want to stick around through until the end. Just a quick note that Mark's personal story was so interesting. There's a lot of context. We took a little more time than usual to cover that. So if you're looking to jump straight to the SEO and the link talk and the traffic talk, feel free to jump ahead to the 18-minute spot, give or take a few seconds. It's really worth it. So if you are interested in kind of hearing Mark's backstory, sit back and relax. I'm going to let the tape roll and enjoy episode 52 of Experts on the Wire with Mark Johnstone. Hey everyone, I am very excited to have Mark Johnstone on the wire with us today. Mark, how are you doing?
I'm well, thanks. Good to be speaking to you.
Yeah, likewise. We were just chatting. We met in Boston a few years ago at SearchLab. And by the way, SearchLab Boston is coming up again soon, I think, in maybe April or May for people listening to this that are in the New England area. It's one of the top search conferences, and I'm not here to advertise stuff, but it just popped in my head right now. So I wanted to mention that to people if they are interested in checking out a search conference. I definitely recommend SearchLab. But Mark, why don't you give us a quick background on yourself and your work with Distilled? To So about 6-7 years ago, actually a little before that, I was looking into starting my own company. And I had previously been working in event management and team building. So that's what I was thinking about starting my business in. I've been in that industry for about 8 years. But as part of learning how I was going to start this business, I was studying a lot of online marketing, which got me into learning about SEO. And I got quite excited about the stuff I was learning, to the point where a few people pointed out to me that I seemed to be a lot more excited about the marketing than I was about the actual company I was proposing to start. Truth be told, I was probably thinking of starting a company in that industry simply because it was what I knew. I mean, there were some parts of it I enjoyed, but yeah, a few people had stopped me and said, maybe you should think about just getting into this SEO stuff. And that kind of stopped me in my tracks. I thought, wow, I'd never really thought about that. I did a bit of a search just to see kind of who was doing SEO and, if there were any jobs available. I discovered Distilled site. I don't know if everyone would know, but, Distilled are an agency, headquarters in London, but they also have offices in New York and Seattle. And yeah, I discovered their site. I really liked a lot of what I saw on their blog and also in the job ad itself. It seemed to be quite a casual company, but it seemed to attract, they said they were looking for smart people who they didn't even mind if you had
the experience, because they could teach you that as long as you could show that you were smart, you were passionate, and you had the ability to get things done. And I really liked that ethos. That was one of the things that drew me to them, because I believe in that as well. I think sometimes people look for box ticking over, whether or not it's the right person, and getting the right person can be harder. So that attracted me to it, as well as some of the stuff I saw on their site. So I applied and got the job at Distilled. I started as an SEO analyst, and I thought I knew SEO, right? I'd been studying some stuff online. I thought I knew SEO, and then I got in there and discovered I really didn't know that much about it whatsoever. So there's a bit of a learning curve there. And I also, I knew a little bit about link building, and links were important. And, but I'd only really read from some stuff online, some pretty basic stuff, and it was back in the day, it was teaching us stuff like directories and articles and guest posting and whatever. And I didn't know there was a kind of more to this link building game. I'd never heard of things like link bait, or content marketing was in its infancy as well, and there was people talking about infographics and data visualization, and these were really popular ways to get links and promote content. And I said link bait there. I know it's not a very popular word, but back in the day, that's definitely what we were calling it.
Yeah, sure.
I think everyone prefers the sort of nicer term of content marketing, but a lot of what we are doing in SEO, when we're totally honest, we are still focusing on links. We do want links. We just want to produce content that has a broader value and not just baiting people, as it were.
Absolutely. And you're still with Distilled now, correct?
No, that's not correct. No, I left Distilled in March last year.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So that jumps us forward about 4 years. But should I continue with the story of Distilled, and then I bring you up to the present day?
Yeah, let's go with Distilled. That was totally my fault. I did all of my research on your article, and most guests we do tons of thorough research on the person and kind of your background and everything. I was so enamored with your article and the one that it's in response to that I focused all on that. But so why don't we back up, finish with Distilled, and then tell us where you're at now? Yeah,
no worries. So, in the first couple, the very first time I had to make a piece of content, I was still an analyst at Distilled. I wasn't leading any of the projects, but one of the guys that was leading a project was on that, that day before you go on holiday and you're trying to get everything wrapped up and taken care of. And he kind of had one foot out the door, and he was like, oh, right, yeah, I remember, Mark, I need you to make an infographic for this company. I genuinely, at that point, I said, sure, I'll do whatever you want, but I have two questions. One, what is that? And two, how do you do it? And he was like, right, okay, just research and find 7 or 10 interesting facts about this topic, send it to the designer, and she'll turn it into something that looks good.
Sure.
And needless to say that it wasn't a recipe for success. You'll need to do some editing there. It didn't work, and actually the next piece I tried as well didn't work, and that resulted in actually by this time I had kind of taken over the lead on one of the projects, but this resulted in the client coming into the office, and he really wasn't happy. He was going red in the face, his neck was up. It was not a pleasant experience.
So let me just make sure I understand, and for the listeners too. So you tried some content, and this was a client of Distilled's, and you tried some content, and what was he not happy about? He just didn't like it aesthetically, or like it didn't work, or?
Oh yeah, it didn't work at all. The first piece out of the two pieces they got next to 0 links. I think there's like 1 link from an infographic director or something. It was a complete flop, because I really didn't know what I was doing there. And,
and this was about the beginning of when you were at Distilled, you're saying, kind of early on.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And so, and there was, at this time in Distilled, there was, the consultants were kind of in charge of coming up with content ideas. So the consultants kind of did everything at this stage. Distilled has since grew out a promotions team and a creative team, which I was instrumental with as the story progresses. But at that stage, the consultants kind of did everything, from the technical to the creative, and it was pretty tough and outreaching. So we're literally doing the full shebang. We had a developer and a data scientist and a designer that we could use, but they were kind of like free resources within the company. Right. We actually had just hired a couple of people one person, Lexi Mills, into PR at that stage as well. But we were still kind of finding our feet as a team.
Sure.
But anyway, yeah, this was unsuccessful. And I the first couple of pieces I made, and some of the consultants throughout the company were having little bits of success. The guy that actually told me, I don't like to name him because I don't think it is a fair representation of his work. He had actually just before that made one of these infographics and made it go viral. So he kind of knew what he was doing. I was missing a few tricks. But I essentially, and I remember going to the conferences back then, actually I think it was like Pro SEO and Link Love, some of the earlier versions that then became Search Love. And there was a lot of people on stage talking about, that you had to make content. This was the new thing now. We all had to make content. I mean, everybody's heard that for years now, but this was about 6 years ago. But the thing that was missing for me, it was like, right, okay, I get that. And they would even show you examples of good content. But for me, it's like, but how do you do it? How do you come up with that idea? That was the kind of one missing part for me. It's like, how do you come up with these ideas and know they're going to be winning ideas? And so I kind of spent a lot of time trying to figure out how to do that. And to do so, whilst everyone in Distilled in the SEO world was very much focused on the SEO community, I figured that actually it'd be advantageous to Distilled and to myself if someone went and focused in other communities and tried to learn what they were doing that we could apply. So I actually absorbed myself a lot more in the data visualization community and to learn a lot about, okay, if we're going to do infographics and data visualization, trying to learn a lot about the principles and what makes a good one. And I even, and through that, actually, I discovered a book called Made to Stick, which has been extremely influential in
many people mention that book.
Yeah, it's a great book, and it tells you. I could tell you quite a bit about it. But essentially, it gives you the criteria for what makes a sticky idea something that's likely to spread.
Yeah.
So I also spent some time speaking to people in the advertising industry and learning about how they think about their strategies and their creative. So after a while, I was able to apply a lot of what I'd learned there, and I had a couple of big hits, as it were, a couple of pieces of content. One that didn't necessarily go viral, but it started to get some really big name links that we Distilled hadn't actually managed to get before, like the likes of the BBC and I want to say TechCrunch, but I don't think it was in this particular piece, but some of the big tech publications. And then one of the next pieces I did, we did collectively, but I was leading the project, and the ideas that I'd come up with, it was one of the first pieces to really go viral, as it were.
Sure.
Which is the viral is the word used in the posts that we're going to be talking about. It's not necessarily how we promote it or aim to make things viral, but often they do go viral, and it's quite exciting when they do. But this piece ended up getting, I think to date, it's got over 1,000 linking root domains, and at the time it got around 150,000 social shares and quite a few million visits. And there were some really big name links in there. So after a while, I started to become the go-to person within Distilled for whenever any of the consultants were making content. In fact, whenever there was any piece of content going in, I was getting emails from the consultant, from the designer, from the data person, from the developer, all asking my opinion on it, to the point where I made a pitch to the bosses at Distilled that maybe actually this should become my job. I'm really interested in it. People are coming to me for advice on it. I could do the technical stuff to an extent, but it wasn't my forte. It wasn't my biggest passion. I was enjoying the creative stuff now that I got a handle on it. So we ended up starting the creative team at Distilled. And then I headed up the creative team with the designer, developer, and data scientist, all as part of the team. And over the next 3-4 years, we grew that team to, there was quite a number more people, up to about 12 people, I think, might even have been larger at its biggest. And And we created a lot of pieces of content, many of which went viral. But, it's not, again, viral isn't the word that we usually promote. I just use it's a phrase that everyone's familiar with.
Sure. So what you're saying is you really saw a need for this department in Distilled, and you kind of proactively went and said, hey, let's create a department around this thing that everyone's asking me about anyways. And I seem to be learning and excited about it and getting some success with it. And that's totally the thing to do. I mean, you saw the opportunity, and I know from some of the case studies and everything with Distilled that you have seen a lot of success with that. And now I remember actually when you presented at SearchLove, your talk was about, I believe, generating content ideas. And there's still a slide that I look at to this day, I'll put in the show notes, where you draw like the topic in the middle, and then you do this brainstorming exercise where you connect. You try to just let your brain go to like different tangent topics. And I think your example was soap. And then maybe you do like baby, clean, towel, and like you go in all these directions. And I love that way of thinking. And I'll link to that in the show notes as well, your updated slides with all of your explanations. What I want to do is let's bring things all the way to where you are now and get to the Moz post that you did. And I'll set that up in a moment. But tell us what you're up to now.
Sure. So in March of last year, I decided to go out on my own. So I'm now a freelance consultant, and I've been helping a lot of agencies and brands who want to build out their content offering. They have some of them have quite a small new team, and they want to learn how do you come up with these link-worthy ideas. And some of them have actually got more experienced teams, but they just want to get me in to see how I can still help improve what they're doing. So I've been doing I've delivered a lot of training courses to both the agencies and the brands over the last year. And also I've been doing some consulting, some ongoing retained consulting with some companies. Just before the festive break there at the end of the year, I sat down with the bosses of one of the agencies I've been working with. I've been working with them for about 8 or 9 months. And I just kind of wanted to check in and see how it was going. And yeah, we pulled up the results of the stuff we've been doing. Because one of the things I found at Distilled and even in my new job is you sometimes run on to the next thing and the next thing and the next thing. You never stop to take stock to see like what have we done, have we achieved? And it was really nice to look at. One of them had been preparing a slide deck of case studies, and they now had like 3 or 4 or 5 pieces of content that I'd managed to hit about 40 or 50 links, which was, a really nice measure for them and their clients. And they had this slide of all the kind of top publications that they'd been featured in. And they said, like, I don't think we'd been featured in hardly any of them before we started working with you. So that was, that was all nice for all of us to kind of go away and go, yeah, this is working. And we'll get back to work in January and see if we can make it even better. That's
awesome. That's a great testament to your work. And I'd love to maybe chat at the end or maybe a little bit after about the work you're doing now, because I'm super interested in that. But let's get to these 2 Moz posts here. So set up the argument for us. So your post is a little bit in response. And by the way, I want to make a disclaimer for the users that I think this is going to be a healthy, valuable discussion. I'm not trying to pin one agency versus another or one person against another. I think that SEO is a very complex, nuanced, often hard to analyze and hard to attribute field. And that's where some of these discussions come from. And of course, it's not as simple as running an ad, or it's not as simple as doing social media at times. And so, we're sort of, beholden to the fact that we don't know what Google's algorithm is. So I want to get that disclaimer out of the way. And I think this is a good, healthy discussion. I might even bring Thomas on the show at some point. But anyways, Mark, set up Thomas's, what is Thomas's argument? His post was called The SEO Myth of Going Viral. What is he trying to say in his post?
Yeah, well, the first I became aware of the post actually was Thomas had written a post on Moz, and when I got up that morning and read my emails, he dropped me an email and said, hey, Mark, I've written this post on Moz. I know that you worked on quite a few of the pieces of content that are mentioned in it. Hope it doesn't cause you any issues or whatever. You might want to check it out. And maybe you can add to the discussion. So I went on there and looked, and there was... So Thomas, I think there was a sort of silent co-author as well that he'd written this with, or done the data analysis with. But they had looked at four different sites, each of whom had, and there was a total of 8 pieces of content across those 4 sites that had gone viral. They'd gotten, for our purposes, they'd gotten a huge number of linking root domains. Most of them have got between 200, 400 or more linking root domains. There were lots of social shares and lots of traffic driven to the site as well. But, for the purposes of this, I'm assuming that the main focus was links, even though we're kind of getting mixed up with the viral phrase there.
Sure.
And the proposal really was that, so what they had done actually as part of their analysis is they had looked at the date. They'd taken some third-party graphs. They'd taken dates from
SEMrush and search metrics and yeah.
Yeah, that's right. And they were looking at the curves and the shape of these graphs. And the main thing they were doing was they're highlighting on the graph the dates that these viral pieces occurred. And then essentially they were saying, so where within a reasonable time frame was part of the phrase that was used for this. They were expecting to see a significant jump in keywords and organic traffic within a reasonable time frame, which was taken to be 3 to 4 months.
Right.
And that's actually for me where the premise was a bit flawed. I don't think that's what I'd expect to see. And I think, there's a strange thing with this, because I actually, in writing my response, I was actually emailing Thomas back and forward. And the kind of strange thing with this is there was a lot of sub-points made in the original post that actually I agree with. I agree with more in the original post than I disagree with. But the main thing that I disagreed with was this premise that, if you got one big piece of content, that within a few months you would see a significant jump in rankings and keywords across your domain for everything. There's almost a point that's worth separating, that the specific keywords that one piece of content happens to be about, it will probably rank highly for that, but we are looking for, a larger shift across the whole domain. That's the kind of the aim of some of this. And there was one of the pieces of content that, one of the sites that was held up in this example was Simply Business, who are a small business insurance company in the UK. It was described as the perennial case study, meaning that I guess Thomas has heard about this case study on more than one occasion. And
yeah, just to put context to that, in the SEO world, there's a couple case studies that Distilled had worked on, Simply Business and Concert Hotels, that are frequently mentioned at conferences or in case studies online. And I think they are kind of held up a little bit as far as one example of the epitome of good link building or good content marketing. And my impression was Thomas was kind of taking this and looking at it and saying, and questioning it and saying, well, did this piece of content that acquired these links actually generate business results as well for this company? So it seems like there's two sides of the argument here from his part. One is being, okay, well, in his quote reasonable time frame, was it successful to increase rankings? But even if it did that or not, did it increase business results? So is that what you got as well? Those kind of the 2 points to his article. Yeah,
absolutely. And I think the main place in which so the two other examples that were in there were Just Park and Amplifon. I didn't work on the Amplifon case, but in both of those, they were focused on sites that had one big viral hit, one huge amount of links going to one piece of content. Now, in those instances, it doesn't necessarily surprise me that one huge burst of links didn't send the site rocketing up the rankings. I think that would give Google very volatile search results. They want to serve good search results to their users. That would get more back. That would make it much easier to game if you just needed to get one big burst and suddenly you jumped up the rankings. But I imagine that if if a site is building lots of links consistently over time, that would be more likely to play into the algorithm and go, okay, this is a site that is more valuable, worthy of ranking higher.
Sure.
And there are other criteria around that as well. The main challenge with the Simply Business graph that Thomas was showing, the one that was taken from these third-party data, which should be taken with a pinch of salt anyway, but it had the general shape of that graph was up and to the right.
Yeah.
And there's a few comments in the original post saying, am I missing something here? But that's a graph that most bosses would want to see. Like, all your key metrics are moving in the right direction.
Right.
But the thing is, the pattern of it didn't seem to fit with this, premise that one big jump in links equals one big jump in rankings.
Sure.
But, the Google algorithm is not linear like that. It's incredibly complex. We couldn't wrap my head around the maths involved in it, even if it was available to us.
Yeah.
So it's really difficult to know. It's not just like input equals output. There could be delays, dampening, threshold. There could be all sorts of things going on in that black box that we don't know about. So you have to kind of take it is correlation. It's not as, particularly with link building, it's not always as directly attributable as you would like to think when you're looking at the activity you did and then the results that you got. I mean, I remember having to do my month-by-month reporting back in the days when I was an SEO. Just as an aside, I don't technically consider myself an SEO these days. I haven't been an SEO consultant for years. I create content that gets links, and usually I do serve SEOs, whether that was in Distilled or whether it's out serving agencies and brands now. But I lost my train of thought there. What was it talking about?
I think that segues nicely to talking about your article. And so your article, and I'll link to everything in the show notes, your article was entitled, What Link Building Success Really Looks Like. And so let's start there at a broad level. You mentioned that having the expectation of a 3 to 4 month time period is not realistic. So let's take a very simple example to begin with. Let's say somebody starts working with a company and they're doing this content marketing, and maybe they've got 2 to 5 good articles out. They've started to generate links within a few months. Should they or should they not expect rankings to increase right away? Or are we really talking about expectations need to be set for looking at a longer time period, like 12 months, 18 months, 24 months? Because I think oftentimes, and I deal with this all the time, as do a lot of the listeners, because I do SEO consulting, they want to know what to expect. They always ask, well, how long is it going to take? When's our rankings going to increase? So let's just, let's think of maybe an average sort of example. So we're not talking about a super big brand, but we're not talking about somebody starting out at the very, very beginning. Maybe just like a moderate, medium-sized site, domain authority 50. What should the general expectation be for them when they start building links?
So it's going to be one of these it depends questions, but it depends where they're starting. And it depends on obviously the keywords they're trying to rank for. But, we can see, and it will also depend on where they're building the links to as well. Actually, the one thing we didn't mention about that, the previous post, was that there were some nice subpoints in it that Thomas raised that, some of the content, including some of the stuff I've been responsible for, could have been better integrated into the site architecture. Some of it could still be closer to the core keywords that you're going after, though that sometimes it's difficult in the content stuff there. Like that, it's ideal if you can build links to a piece that's really product focused, but most of the time you need to move a little bit away from that to really appeal to a broad audience. You can't always talk about what your product is, but there were some nice points in there. So, in related to your question here, it would depend if the article they're building links to is the thing they want to rank for. Like if that's the page they want to rank for, then there'll be more benefit in linking straight to the page than linking to the domain, though you need to balance that out. And it also depends how you're building those links. It depends which sites they're coming from and, how many you're getting. But in the short version, if you you can go up from, if you're on like if you're starting from nowhere, if you're like page 5 and the search results are below, you can get right up to the top of page 2, even the bottom of page 1, depending on how competitive it is, reasonably quickly. Like, I wouldn't be able to quote you on number of links per se, because it would all depend on the competition. But, that could go up within 6-ish months. It can do. We've seen that happen. In another case study we were looking at Distilled, we've seen that within about 6 months of working with us. They had 4 pieces of content out in that time, but the big movements had happened by the third one, and we were tracking something like 50 commercial keywords, and they, I think about 29 of them shifted from below page 5 to up onto the first page, probably the bottom of first page, but definitely not in the top 3. But that all happened within about 6 months, so that can happen.
Yeah, let's dive into that example just for a minute or two. So, how many links again were built to this particular site? Approximately.
So there were 3 pieces of content, and I can't remember the numbers off the top of my head, but I don't remember any of them going completely nuts. So I think you were probably talking a steady amount of links, between 20 to 40 to each piece.
Yeah.
Probably 40 to the biggest one, and maybe actually around 10 to 20 on the other 2. I think that's right. I'm afraid I don't have those numbers at my fingertips.
Sure.
But
so is it? I've highlighted a bunch of quotes in your article. One part you say, maybe there's an assumption that one big burst in links will result in a jump in rankings as discussed in the original post. And then that's the myth that it was seeking to dispel. So there can be a variety of things we can expect to happen, but in general, are we all kind of agreeing that the thing that won't happen probably is a huge jump in rankings with just one viral piece of content?
Do you know what? I wouldn't say like that black and white. Unfortunately, I'd love to say this doesn't happen, this is how it works. That could happen, but I don't think it always does. And I know that's a frustrating answer.
Yeah, but also isn't it? Wouldn't you consider it a bonus if that does happen, right? Like we shouldn't promise that as consultants, nor should the business owner or marketing department expect that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I think setting expectations of results is actually one of when people don't know what to expect, that is I found that one of the hardest parts of my job in this actually. And usually I had usually I focused on the fact that even as a starting point, not every piece of content is going to get lots of links. And I would normally say that within 3 or 4 pieces of content, one of them and from experience, we would manage to get at least one of them to go big. And then and some of the others would get a smaller amount of links, and averaged over all 3 or 4, that would still work out to be, a reasonable amount of links over 4 pieces of content. Because I actually find that you often end up with a piece of content that gets like very little, like 0 to 10, or maybe sort of 20 to 30, or it gets like 200 or more. There's like quite a big gap where it either just goes or it doesn't. And that's kind of like, if you're building lots of links, that's sort of why these ones that do go viral can kind of even it out a bit, because there's quite a bit of risk and reward in this content-based link building.
Sure. But one of the questions I saw a lot in the comments off of what you just said was kind of the expectations of the time frame and setting those. And a few people in the comments said, well, how most business owners aren't going to put budget towards or be very excited at the proposition that if somebody says, hey, we can build you a great piece of content, but it might take 3 or 4 years till you see, absolute best results. So how do we frame this for business owners, and what's like the best way to balance that?
Yeah, like I was saying before, that you can get up the rankings in the lower pages pretty fast, but obviously you're not getting a lot of business results from going from page 5 to page 2. There's not many people going past page 1 to get their results.
Yeah.
So then getting up page 1, So the Simply Business example that was given over the course of about we worked with them for 3 or 4 years, but I think they saw their main growth over a period of about 2.5 years. It took us a while to get going with it. And then they saw this growth where for a lot of commercial keywords, they went up the rankings from positions 10, 12 up to positions, 3, 2, and even in their most commercial, their biggest focus commercial keywords, they went from 3 to 1 over that course of 2 years. But they had invested in a lot of content. Like I was saying earlier, sometimes you don't actually stop and take stock of what you've done. It wasn't until I was pulling together all the data for the blog post, I didn't realize we'd made 21 pieces of content across those 3 years.
Right.
So there's quite a lot. And I think something like at least 10 of them got more than 50 linking root domains and stuff. So,
do you know how did Distilled get the opportunity to create such great content for these businesses? I don't know if you're aware of how that happened or the sales process, but I guess where I'm going with this is maybe how can other consultants or agencies maybe sell this idea? And if you are familiar with how Distilled made that happen.
Yeah.
Was it like, hey, we're going to build you this great piece of content. You might get links, but there's all these other benefits. Or was it, we're going to build you great content to build links, but we don't know when what was kind of the metric or the goal maybe behind those?
So it kind of started smaller. It was usually, the SEO consultants would, have a client who essentially the brief is simply, like it's an SEO brief. We want to improve our rankings. We want to improve our business results by doing so. And usually they would start with a bit of a technical audit. And, on some of the bigger sites, they could find so many technical challenges and so many wins that could be made by sorting the structure of the site and various technical aspects that, that could actually be a huge part of the project. But for others where it's a smaller site, so there's not too much technical stuff to tidy up, or it just happens to be pretty tight, they've done their due diligence already. The next thing would be at some point you'd be looking at links, going, if you want to compete and you want to rank, we need to get more links for you. And in terms of we were starting small, and really by that I mean, we did simpler pieces of content, and we were looking for kind of smaller goals in terms of links. But for essentially there was a few clients where we either had there's a few projects I was working on where we kind of maybe got a slightly larger budget and an opportunity to do something a bit bigger, or simply that this is a bit of a funny one, but we saw that we kind of had an idea that if we invested more in it, this could really go. And even though the client maybe didn't necessarily have the budget back then, we just wanted to do it, and me and some of my colleagues were spending our evenings and our weekends getting this stuff done. Like some of those first few early pieces, that's exactly how we did it.
So you made it, like you saw the opportunity, and even if the client wasn't totally bought in, you just went ahead and did it.
No, that's not what I mean. They were bought into the idea, but I think, we maybe weren't getting big budgets to create content back then. It was just enough to make maybe a very simple infographic, but I would just put in extra time, which was over and above the budget,
right? Because
I believed in the idea. I wanted to get better at this. I wanted to prove the success to the client, and then we could begin to create. And we even said to them, look, we've actually put in more on this, but, we think this will really work. And when it does work, and if we want to keep doing this, then we might have to discuss, a larger budget. But we put in I personally and some of my colleagues put in extra time to kind of make those breakthroughs, to come up with better stuff, to prove we could do it, to show the results to the client. And then we started. And one of the things I focus on in the consulting work that I do now is that, if you're an agency, you need to get those first few case studies that says we can do this, and then companies will be willing to give you money for it, and then you have more success, and then it grows, and then it grows.
So what were some of the initial actual results that you showed them from these first pieces of content? Did you come to them and say, hey, we did this, we got links, or hey, we did this and we got traffic, or we got rankings, or what were the metrics that you showed them to then continue?
So initially it is links. I don't think, because we're saying, like one piece of content doesn't necessarily equal, jumping up the rankings, but, for a lot of clients that you're working with, they know that links are important. They know about SEO, like those factors of SEO. So it's initially links. In fact, in any project, I would say initially they know they won't need to get links. You get links because actually they have a lot of experience of working with. Quite a few times we've worked with clients who have been with a bunch of agencies before, or they've tried it themselves and they know it's hard to get links. So as soon as you can prove, okay, these guys can get links, that's cool. That gets them on board for the first bit. And then, within a reasonable time frame, which would be 6 months plus, I would say, when they start to see, right, rankings are going up too, then everything's going the right way. But your first selling is, your first proof point is that you can create a piece of content that gets links. And then later it's going to be, is this doing anything from a business? Yeah,
I love that. Let's jump to some of the factors you talk about in regards to the links. One of them being topical relevance of the content. This is an area that I'm fascinated with, and I think will benefit a lot of the listeners, because oftentimes some SEOs or businesses are timid to create content that to them feels like it's not about their product or their service. But yet what you're saying is, even if it has a relationship, it can still benefit. Can you talk a little bit about the topical relevance, and do we need to stay super close to the product and service, or have you seen results, straying a little bit away from that?
Yeah, I mean, it's often, I often actually pre-frame, certainly at the creative pitch stage, but sometimes even at the sales stage, how I think about creative content to try and get them in the right frame of mind for this. Because you're right, often, and when I said setting expectations is a challenging part of the job, also that is another challenge that you frequently come up about, where they only want to talk about their product, and you've got to try and move them away from that a bit. There's kind of two ways in which I think you can do related content. So one approach is to focus on the benefit, and that's kind of not what the product is, but what it does. And that's what they do a lot in advertising, so I always use the Red Bull example, but Red Bull doesn't make content about caffeinated drinks, right? Yeah. And I could imagine having a client who, let's say, another type of Red Bull or another juice, and if they hadn't ever seen the Red Bull stuff, they're like, no, we have to make stuff about caffeine. We make caffeine. And it's like, yeah, but no, there's a broader picture. And so they've used the theme of Red Bull gives you caffeine. It's like adrenaline. You can push life to the limits. And then they've created all this extreme sport content around pushing life to the limits. So you can do stuff like that.
Yeah.
And similarly, you mentioned the soap diagram that I had in a presentation. That was just an example. If I had been brainstorming for Dove Soap, and Dove Soap had a similar thing, and they do the campaign for Real Beauty. So you can do associated stuff. Or the other one is to focus on your audience's core interests. And so, I use a Simply Business example again because it's a good one in this sense. They were selling insurance to small business owners. But, you're not going to be able to engage small business owners in content about insurance every week, every month of the year. You only want to think about it very briefly when you have to renew your premium. And even then, it's a bit of a frustration. It's just something that you want to take care of and put it aside and focus on what you really care about.
Sure.
And what small business owners really care about is protecting and growing their business. So, and we didn't actually initiate this at Simply Business anyway. They already had this huge knowledge section on their site with lots of good content that you might need to know about legal, about finance, about marketing. And we kind of played into the marketing stuff. And then we branched off into other areas as well. But I think you can focus. I usually use the example actually in pitch decks and things it's not about the product. It's not about caffeine. It's about pushing life to limits. It's not about insurance. It's about protecting and growing your business.
I think what a lot of people are curious about, and I totally agree from a marketing standpoint, I think what some people want to know about is from a link standpoint. If Google sees, hey, we're getting a whole bunch, and I'll use the concert hotels example. You got a ton of links to the ranges of vocalists, right? And I love that piece of content. It inspires me to this day. But I think what people are wondering is, okay, external sites link to this piece of content that's about the vocalist with the biggest vocal ranges. Does that actually help a hotel website? And granted, I see the topical relationship, and I think us as humans can see that. But is Google's algorithm, in your sense, is Google's algorithm seeing the relationship and therefore giving them a boost for hotel-related keywords?
Yeah, so the concert hotels example was the one that we didn't delve into earlier. I mentioned the two that had the one viral hit, and obviously I've spoken at length in the Simply Business stuff. And the concert hotels example, they were, which is detailed in the post, they came to us and they were suffering from some penalties, some algorithmic penalties due to a variety of factors on their site. And, one of the things that we were doing to try and lift them out of that, as well as a lot of on-site changes, was to really focus on building a lot more high-quality links to balance out some of the other links they may have had in the past. And but it took a long time for that penalty to shift. So when you're under a Google penalty, you're kind of all your metrics are kind of flatlining, and then eventually when you break through, you go up and to the right. Well, you should have a jump and up. And so it appears that they're beginning to see a bit of a shift, but it's been a long haul there. So we'll never be able to know the impact of those links specifically. But to your question about the topical relevance, I think it's an interesting one. We definitely did see building links to this knowledge section of Simply Business to work well. And in the other case study I was mentioning earlier, which I can't publicly name, unfortunately, but it was a very similar idea. Again, actually, they were in the finance space, and we were talking about stuff to do with tech founders and tech funders and things like that. Now, ultimately, the answer to the question is, I've seen it work, but I am curious about it. There may be limits to it. That it may change, and I do think it is something it's something we kind of need to watch. And as Thomas said, it would be great to hear more case studies so that we could compare and contrast. My kind of fear is there's possibly not enough kicking around to really be able to see the distinctions. Because, in a lot of SEO stuff, we'd love to test it. But how do you test running 10 viral campaigns? Is hard enough to do in the real world. How are you going to test them to see if it can do an A/B test on that? That's kind of going to be difficult. But it is something. It's also, I think, the main way forward on a lot of that stuff is to try and make sure that you are getting other benefits from the content you're producing as well. The more that it can start to integrate with, if you can be gathering email subscribers, social following, if you have a good way of then getting business benefit out of your social following. I'm not convinced all businesses are. I think a lot just have them because they should and everyone else has them. But if you have a good way of turning your social following into business results and converting them later, and there's people talk a lot about the added PR and brand value of the content, which definitely is there, but I tend not to talk about that too much because that's not the goal in which that people are coming to us for that content. So I don't like to go, oh, look over there. Let's stay focused on what we're trying to do. But there are additional benefits for it as well. I
certainly usually frame that to clients as a bonus. I say, look, the goal is links for SEO and rankings, but you're also going to get this other stuff, and that can often comfort them because then they realize that there's all these other benefits. So I want to chat for a moment about, you have a section called integrating the content into the site architecture. And I know oftentimes for some of these distilled examples and other studies I've seen, oftentimes the content built that gets the links not only is not necessarily integrated into the site architecture, the navigation, the menu, the footer, and so forth, but also the design is totally different. Oftentimes it's like a stripped down version of the site. So what's your sense on that? When people are building out content, should they be at all concerned with content for content marketing and links that does not fit into the architecture nor the normal design template?
Yeah, I mean, this was, I think these were the sort of really strong points, I think, that were raised in the original myth post. And that was the one where I kind of sat back and thought, yeah, you know what, actually, I probably need to take some of that on board. Like, whilst we have seen it work, and to be clear to the listeners, a lot of the times we might make these full page interactive experiences, which then links back into the main site, but it isn't surrounded by the normal, navigation, header and footer of the site, and maybe even sidebar, etc. There's a few reasons why. Sometimes there is some compromise when you're working on projects with bigger companies and they've got all kinds of teams and processes and things going on. But some of the main reasons, so that these were partially a compromise or done for deliberate effect, but the main reasons I usually chose to have these full page immersive experiences was A, that it's more impactful, that you come here and for some of them, you really, this whole thing kind of takes over your browser and it's a more aesthetic experience, so it's likely to have more impact, more likely to share. There is challenge with it appearing a bit too branded. If it's, it will depend on the site in which you're doing it on, but if it's quite a sort of garish, very obviously promotional site, then it can be quite difficult looking to get coverage on those. If you're asking a newspaper, hey, link to us here, and they go there and the whole site looks very kind of commercial and promotional, you quite often get a response going, you can speak to our advertorial team. But and then also if you're doing the kind of bigger interactive pieces, you can get code conflicts if you've got to drop it in within the the CSS of the rest of the site, and which we have done. We've done that, and there's a few ways around that. You can just work on those code conflicts if you and the developer on the client side are willing to work through it, then that's possible, and we have done that before. Or you can iframe them in. Now, obviously, there's SEOs kind of shudder when they hear iframe because a lot of that content might not be crawled. But if you have other content around it on the page, that is possible.
Sure.
But those are the reasons we've done it. But actually, I think, that is a compromise, and maybe actually I'd admit that that's something I've maybe defaulted to too much, just became a habit. And actually, I think, and I have done before and since, and so have Distilled, created stuff that does sit more within the normal site architecture. And maybe that's something that is something I would probably look at more and think, okay, I certainly think if it is not within the normal site architecture, you wouldn't be getting the full benefit. But our experience with past clients has shown that you can get benefit from this.
Sure. So it sounds like your consulting work now is still geared towards helping people generate the content and or the ideas to generate links. So can you talk to us a little bit about what you're doing now strategically and idea-wise to generate and achieve links for your clients now?
Yeah, so a lot of my clients at the moment are, like I say, they're building their own teams and they're looking for me to actually come in and try to develop the team and train them as opposed to coming up with the ideas myself. Though I do still do the odd bit of ideation for a few companies here and there. And so recently I've kind of been thinking. So a lot of the content that I do and I've done and we did at Distilled was, is data visualization or it's infographics or it's very data based, at least. It's not always a data visualization, but there's usually quite a large data component. So I realized when reviewing how I've come up with ideas in the past, I realized that you really start from 3 starting points. One is the starting with the topic. So that might be a bit like your traditional brainstorm. Okay, we've got to come up with ideas in this niche. What can I think of? Or what's more helpful is to actually mind map out all the topics and subtopics and related topics in that area, and then brainstorm off of each of those, because suddenly, rather than starting with one starting point, let's say it's tech or whatever it is, or money, you've branched out into all these different subgenres that allow you to essentially quickly, now you've got 60 or 80 starting points rather than one. So you can generate a lot more ideas.
So you're saying maybe like have tech and have software and have business, and like have topics that are broad enough but generally related.
Developers, front end, back end, like just branch out whichever way you can think. Yeah. Sure. And then you've got, and then you can also start with the data, and sometimes just go out and find out, well, what data can we find? Like literally just trawling the web for data sets related to what you're doing. And some you might already know off the top of your head, and others you're just doing through Google searches. And then actually delving into those data sets and figuring out what are the actual variables in here. And all of those variables are starting points. So again, now you've got hundreds of new starting points.
Sure.
And then my last one, which tends to be my favorite, is that I recommend everybody has. I call it a swipe file, an old copywriting phrase, but some people, like maybe I saw it described as an inspiration file the other day, which might make it a bit more easy to understand. But I have a massive file or collection of inspiring content, and particularly different formats of content. So once I've delved into one thing I forgot about the topics as well, I don't just mind map off the top of my head. I do that to mind map and break out the topics just to see what I could come up with, what connections I already have. But I also go out onto the web and explore and find out what topics are popular in this niche using tools like Mozi's Open Site Explorer and BuzzSumo, etc.
Yeah,
but with all that, armed with all that information on the topics and stuff that's resonating and all the data that's available, I then maybe go through my swipe file, a collection of inspiring formats, and try to connect the pieces between the topics, the data, and the formats that we could put it in.
Yeah, that's really good. Let's actually talk about, if you have an extra minute or do you have an extra minute or two?
I have as much time as you like.
That's excellent. I'd love to chat.
Although it's 5 o'clock on a Friday here, Dan. You are keeping me from having a beer, probably.
What is it? 5 o'clock your time?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I'll let you off.
I'm kidding.
Yeah. Well, I'll let you off the hook in a minute. No.
I was joking. You have as long as you like.
Awesome. All right. 3 hours later. No, the data section. So let's talk about a real example here for a second. I have a client that's kind of in the industrial B2B space, right? They make these like asset tags and that kind of thing. And like data plates and stuff like that. And we've been doing some content for them related around just safety, workplace safety, industrial safety, right? And today I was digging through some stats from OSHA and all these government sources. So what could a client or a company like that start to think about doing with maybe industrial safety statistics? Let's say I've got this document from OSHA, right? It's 10 pages long and they've got all the safety stats from 2015 and it's just sitting there in a big PDF. Where do we go from there? Do we try to find the interesting nuggets in that? Do we try to maybe make a visual graph out of it? What are some things we could do with that?
Yeah, so there's a couple of things. One is it's nice to have already started with to have in mind before you go through that. There's two approaches. Okay, I'll start with the other one actually. Go through it yourself, read it, and just kind of watch out for anything that grabs your curiosity. Like it's sort of like, that kind of actually that gut feel, or journalists call it following your nose, but there's some actually kind of like physical sensation that goes, that's interesting, that's curious. You follow those, and that might cause you to then start searching on something else. You might want to, particularly if you don't understand it or you'd like to get a clearer understanding of it. That's usually what we're trying to do in a lot of the pieces of content. I think the infographic and data visualization stuff is very abused in the SEO industry to an extent, but I like to think of it as it's a visual aid. It's information in a graphic form, but the way in which you present it visually makes it something easier to understand. It puts it into a new context. Whereas a lot of times, infographics done bad, like I did way back in the day, is just information made a bit prettier and stuck in a JPEG,
sure.
Or now made scrolling parallax and all kinds of things. But I'm no clearer. It's just a bit nicer. But yeah, so it would be looking for things that grab you. And
that's a really interesting way to put it. And I don't mean to interrupt, but I want to make sure to highlight this for the users. I've noticed this, that you said you have a physical sensation when you're reading something. And I think that, especially in the age of 20 tabs being open and distraction and skimming through things and trying to do things quick, I think people should try to pay attention to that more. I mean, that's super fascinating that you said that.
Yeah, it was actually just something I was reading recently that made me realize that. So a lot of the times I particularly when trying to do presentations, I read books on creativity to try and relate to, like, how am I doing this already? And one of them talked about this, like looking for this, I can't remember what book it was now, but like this physical response, and that's true. Now, it's not likely to be, particularly if you're reading a document on, health and safety, it's not likely to be like a huge punch in the gut. It might just be a tiny thing that just piques your attention. You go, that I want to know more about this, or that sounds vaguely interesting. Yeah. The other option I was going to say is also important to have started off with a bit of thinking about who is this for.
Right.
And so if it was for health and safety professionals, then obviously you need to dig. That's going to be a bit harder because you need to dig in a bit and find out what do they already know, what do they care about, what are they frustrated about, what do they share, and then see how you can tie whatever this is. Often I think with health and safety professionals, thinking about where they are in their job, they're trying to encourage people to do the things they should do to save themselves getting injured, to save themselves getting very seriously hurt or worse. But they are frequently blocked with, it's the fun police, it's health and safety, and I know, like, I've done some research in this niche before as well, but some of them are very passionate about it and they get frustrated by that. They're genuinely trying to do a good thing and look out for people. Yeah. So if there's a way that you can somehow creatively make their point, like, and give them this thing that would be like, hey, look, like, so it helps them to communicate with the people they're trying to communicate with, that could be useful. I'm just talking off the top of my head here.
Well, that's super insightful, because not only did you say what would help them from a kind of an intellectual standpoint, but you highlighted an emotion that they're feeling. They're feeling frustrated and like they can't do this thing that they're passionate about. So there's that friction there that I think a lot of people need to pay attention to when they're creating content for people. And I think somebody that does this exceptionally well in the SEO space is Rand, because oftentimes I've commented to him that I would message him and say, hey, you created a Whiteboard Friday that's perfect for me to give my clients, to help me prove my point to them. So it's super interesting how he's thinking about how he can help me do my job better, to give me this kind of information to arm me with to give to my clients. And I think you're talking about a similar approach there. And I can already think of things potentially that could, just as we're chatting, that could help my client in that space. That's super interesting.
And if it was more actually a public facing piece that wasn't necessarily for the health and safety professionals themselves, I think health and safety is something that we kind of just all love to ignore. We are the problem that the health and safety officers are up against. Right. So it would need to be something that really shocked, that said, look, you do need to pay attention to this. This is serious.
Yeah, I think one thing we have on this client site is actually an industrial safety quiz. And we have 2 or 3 years now of data, not tons, but maybe 750 to 1,000 people have taken this quiz. And there's 50 questions. So we have some data just sitting there to say, hey, did you know that, 60% of the people got the question about the ladder wrong or about the hazardous materials wrong? So what could we do with that? How could we come up with content to maybe attract some link acquisition or, if not links, some sort of SEO success from that? Because this is proprietary data. Nobody else has it.
Yeah. It's the reason I'm sort of stalling is I'm trying to think about what in there is going to grab, because you've always got these multiple audiences, and the question there is like, what is going to grab a journalist or a blogger to write about it first before you even get to put it to the health and safety professional? Although those bloggers and journalists may be health and safety professionals themselves.
Sure.
Although with that kind of stuff there as well, that sounds like more a kind of commercial, like more a general consumer facing piece. Yes. Sometimes there's things that you can. It would be nice to try and match up with other data. Sorry, like so how many injuries and how many days off work and how much has an injury caused by one of those things? How much is that cost in terms of injuries, days off, money? So that would need to be data that you maybe pulled from somewhere else, and then you would say, 60% don't know this. If they did, if this is how much you could save. That I don't know that I'm shooting off the top of my head, but if you can scale it out, over a year of how much that would save people simply by knowing where they should place something or where they.
So you're saying maybe take the data in our quiz and saying, hey, hundreds of people don't know about ladder safety. This is how much money and resources and time the lack of ladder safety costs in a year. Now we're associating that with something tangible and kind of real, and that maybe that they would care about.
Yeah, and you've got, and this is avoidable. And, X% could have been avoided if, joining those two data points. I was once at a talk, a data journal. And like, to be clear, I don't know that if that idea itself is a winner. We're kind of just brainstorming live to an extent.
Sure, yeah.
But the combination of data points is usually what makes it more interesting. I was once at a talk where the guy said, if you've got one data point, you've got like a cocktail party fact. Did you know that? Yada, yada, yada. I mean, I don't know if you'd be using that particular line at a cocktail party. You may not get invited back. But if you have two data points, you begin to create more of a story. There's a connection between them. And actually what they said was that if you then add, this was mostly for journalists and data journalists, but if you then add a person into it, a real life, a human aspect to the story, like how has somebody's life been affected by this, then you've got a real relatable story.
And that circles back to Made to Stick, because actually in that book, Made to Stick, they talk about, I think they compared trying to get donations for maybe some cause in Africa or something like that. And one of them, they used one child's story. And then the other one, they used all this data, and the story got more donations. Do you remember that example? It was something to that extent.
I didn't, but I can totally believe it. I've read the book 2 or 3 times, but I need to keep looping back around it because I always learn more every time I do. But I mean, that's why newspapers always hone in on the people in the story. It's always about people, Data isn't quite as relatable. So actually interesting, saying that I do a lot of stuff with data. We're not very good at comparing and contrasting, connecting numbers and abstract concepts in our head. So if you can make it visual, that is a good first step. You can actually go further and make it concrete and make it human. And it's just about deciding which is going to make it most relatable. But yeah, it's all like actually the abstraction of numbers and data is hard to relate to. It doesn't give us anything through the senses to an extent. So that's what visualization and creating stories can actually make it more impactful.
That's a really great tip, because I think, we sort of had a wall in our mind about let's do something with data, but then bringing in the story and the person, I think brings it to a whole another level. And like you said, makes it more attractive to the journalists. So I love that. What do you think was so successful? And I'll let you go in a minute, but about the concert hotels one really fascinates me, the vocal ranges. And I bring this up because I'm working with a client that I won't name, but actually it was way back, Stephanie from Distilled. This is one of her clients way back in the day. It's a piano company. They sell restored pianos and they restore pianos. And we just started working with them, but the vocal ranges thing was fascinating to me. And I was trying to tie that back into, okay, maybe we can talk about something having to do with pianists, right? And I'm a pianist myself, actually. That's my degree, as a classical piano degree. So I already have a little bit of a leg in there. But I'm wondering, what do you think made that vocal ranges thing so successful? Was it just because we were talking about pop culture and nobody had studied that before? What what generated the success of that piece, do you think?
So there's a few factors at play. I actually just want to mention there's some really nice visualizations been done on pianos where they took, you should look them up or I'll find them and send them to you. You may have seen them already, where they looked at the work by different famous composers, and they turned the keys of the piano into a graph, and you could see that one guy really favored all the black keys and one favored I can't remember what else you could see from. That was the one thing that struck me. I didn't dive into love. I thought it was a really clever way of using the piano itself as a visualization. It certainly spread around the net.
Oh, that's really cool. Yeah, we'll look that up, and if I find it, I'll put it in the show notes. But go ahead.
Yeah, I would see if I can find it too. The vocal ranges piece. So, the Made to Stick book that we mentioned has criteria for a successful idea. Those are simple, unexpected, concrete, credible, emotional, and tells a story. And we have a few other criteria that we use as well when we're looking at an idea. But to an extent, I think it's really useful to have those as tools to try and dig into an idea and figure out, is this likely to work? If not, why not? If so, why? Because without criteria where you can sort of get a little bit more X-ray vision into an idea, I found previously you're often in these weird conversations where it's like, I'm not feeling it. Oh, I am. Why not? Just not feeling it. And that's the whole conversation, because nobody has the ability to really critique it and dig in and go, what's not working? Right. How could we improve this? And they're really useful. But to an extent, they're still improving your chances, making it your best guess. But there are still some ideas where you press the button, you're sure they're going to work, and they don't quite, and vice versa. And the vocal ranges one, I thought it would do all right, but there's no way I would ever predicted that kind of success. There's a few factors at play. I mean, one was that literally this had never been visualized before. There's no way that you could go on and see compare the vocal ranges of different singers easily. You could pull the information from different places, but that was the value that we'd added. We go, look, now you can quickly compare. And it was really interesting to see the vocal ranges of, Bob Dylan versus Prince versus Marvin Gaye, and of course at the top, Mariah Carey and Axl Rose. Yeah. But then we got lucky with a few other things. There is some luck involved sometimes. There was some very dubious journalism the first time it went out, and the paper in the UK said that an official study had revealed that Axl Rose is the world's greatest singer, and that kind of caused some controversy, which is a more powerful emotion rather than just the curiosity and the insight. And people kicked off going, that's not what he said, and this is what it said, and then other people did some more analysis and said, actually, this guy's got a broader range. So I think there's a little bit of that. I think that controversy helped. There's no way that didn't. That made it kick off, and people started getting a bit angry about it, to be honest. And that when there's emotion involved, as you said, it just became this heated discussion, and how heated discussions can go online. So
that's interesting. There, it sounds like the journalist took your visualization in the study, and the journalist turned it into a story in a sense. Yeah.
So we didn't actually. We debated about whether we should go out with the story. I mean, the controversy was that they said that we'd said he was the greatest singer ever, which is, not what I said at all. It said he had the widest vocal range of the people that we'd analysed. I think it was also unexpected, surprising is one of the criteria in the Made to Stick book, and it was surprising to see Axl Rose up there above Mariah Carey. Everybody knows Mariah Carey's got this piercing whistle that she can do. Well, most people know. You're into music. I did a course in music production, so I was aware of this. And one of the reasons actually that I had a sense that this piece would do well, not that well, but well, simply that I had a background in this. I found something that was interesting to me. Phil Nottingham, who I was discussing the piece with, also quite interested in music, has a background in performance, and we were both like, I would love to see this, and that was a good starting point for it. But it was surprising. There's an emotion there, and the controversy as well.
Sure. So I just want to ask my last sort of segment of the questions here, and then we can wrap things up. But what did Distilled do once you publish a piece of content? Because you often hear, if you build it, they will come is not entirely true. So did Distilled have a process for okay, we published this thing. Now, do you have a list of 30 journalists you reach out to, or did you have some kind of process for getting it out there?
Yeah, absolutely. So we had the creative team, and then we also had the promotions team, where we have PRs and outreachers. And we would, at the very start of the project, we would make sure we knew who's the lead consultant on this, who's the lead creative on it, and who is the lead PR. And we'd check in with them at each stage, at ideation stage. Here's our ideas. Which of these can you see is likely to be successful that journalists could write about? Could you imagine emailing them? What would they write? Is this likely to work for their audience? And we would get the three people, the creative and the consultant and the PR, to feedback on the ideas and at each stage of production. And we can feedback in any aspect we want, but the main focus for the PR to bear in mind was, is this right for the target journalist? Mm-hmm. And often as well, once we've created the idea, or even in the brief, we would specify which publications are we going to go after. And then we'd want to make sure, whilst we're going through production, is the tone of this copyright, is the angle that we're focusing on, is it right for that publication? Is the design right for that publication? Because sometimes designers might make something cool and sleek and minimal, and not on this occasion, but on another occasion, you'd be like, but wait, this is for, it's for a female lifestyle magazine. If you go and look at there, it's not all that clean, cool, techie, bold stuff. It's a little bit softer. We need to change the design a bit to make sure it fits with the publication. So, but we would always we have the PR, and then in terms of process, they will be, they use Gurkhana as a tool that a lot of PRs use to get the contacts of relevant journalists and bloggers.
Say that one more time. What was it?
Gurkhana is spelled Gorkhana. It's not cheap. I think it might be like $500 or more a month, but it's valuable, and it saves a lot of time if you're doing this stuff.
Sure.
But you can gather the right journalists, and often when we're getting close to finishing the production, like a week or two to go, we start seeding it with journalists, like give them a heads up, this is coming. Like we would usually, I think a lot of people talk about, you sort of do the journalists in layers and the publications in layers, right? These are our top guys. We want to hit them first, like maybe just like 10 or less. And so we'll seed that to a few publications, might even offer them an exclusive. I think on this one, we may have offered the vocal ranges piece. We may have offered an exclusive to the HuffPo, because they embedded the full interactive, and the piece on their site alone got over 100,000 shares, and that sent over 2 million visits to the client site. Wow. And that's not the interesting thing with that, because sometimes when you say that, people go, "Oh, I've got to get on HuffPo, you'll get 2 million visits." That's not true. I've had plenty of stuff on HuffPo that doesn't send it. It's a great platform if the content itself is still compelling to allow that to run. And the interesting thing about that is, journalists are all kind of measured on the metrics like the shares of their post, how much traffic it generates. So if they can get a piece that generates loads of 100,000 social shares, and if we got 2 million visits from HuffPo, that means how many visits did they get? 5 million, 6 million, 10 million to that one page? Yeah. And everyone in the publication is watching the metrics, and there'll be a massive spike on who wrote that, what is that? And that's when you realize that, because I think sometimes you feel like you're begging the journalist to cover it. But they need to write stuff, and they need to create stuff, and they need to hit these metrics. They're based on ad impressions. So that works for them as well. And if you can create good stuff like that, we frequently get journalists saying, keep sending, like we've had a few journalists from different publications saying, send me everything you're making. I want to see it. Wow.
So you're not only making sure you're hitting your clients' metrics, but you're trying to hit the journalist metrics too, because that's a win-win-win-win-win. Everyone's benefiting from that.
Yeah, exactly. And it was a little bit of a light bulb moment when that happened. I think, I was an editor actually called us about a different piece that we'd made about the creative routines of famous people, and they'd had a similar experience. They'd had 1 or 2 million hits to their site. It was one of the top pages that month. And this guy, like, he says they're obsessed with their analytics. They're all watching their analytics on their phone all day long, even at the weekends. But the editor called us and said, I'd like to have a meeting with you guys. And it was about, like, tell me when you're doing more stuff. And also, these are the types of things we like to cover. If you were likely to produce something along these lines, we'd be more likely to cover it.
Sure.
That was the moment, actually, I switched my thinking about it a bit and realized, like you said, this can be a win-win rather than just thinking we're begging for coverage.
And was Distilled's approach to say, let's go after the big publications and the journalists and let that trickle down to blogs and smaller sites? Or did you also do any promotion to, maybe mid-tier sites, mid-tier blogs and things like that?
Yeah, absolutely. We were just, this pre-launch stuff, allowing people to, we got to do what we can to make it a valuable offering to the kind of bigger sites to try and get on there. They can be really crucial to the success. I think every piece that's gone viral has been the result of it getting onto one of these bigger platforms where it got a lot of eyeballs, and still the content was compelling enough to grab them and make it roll. But yeah, no, we would reach out, we would have a list of like maybe up to 200 people that we were going to contact, and maybe further down the list, it's a slightly more blanket email than, at the top where it'd be very carefully crafted. But we would do it in phases. But yeah, there'd be some pre-outreach before the actual launch, letting them know it's coming so they can get it as soon as it goes up, potentially even get an exclusive on the interactive. They'll be the first to get it for like 24 or 48 hours so they can get a bit of the cycle before anyone else. And then sometimes with these really big sites as well, sometimes these really big sites, there's like you say, there's a trickle down effect. Like if you get it on TechCrunch, suddenly most of the other tech publications are publishing it and things like that.
Right.
But yeah, then as soon as launch is done and we've done the exclusives or we've hit the big sites that we want to hit, we'll then start to push it out to lots of other journalists and bloggers. And yeah, we do a lot of outreach, like outreach itself. There'll be somebody on that for, at least 2 or 3 weeks, probably a month. It might not be the only thing they're working on that month, but there's a lot behind it.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Mark, we've gone an hour and 22 minutes, 23 minutes here, and that's great. So do you listen to podcasts?
I listen to some, but I need to get more on it. I've been trying out different ones recently. I've been trying some in creativity, and I've gotten into the Tim Ferriss one of late. I tend to go broad.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What's your opinion on longer form podcasts? And I'm glad you mentioned Tim because he has some episodes that are 3.5 hours long. In the marketing world, and I was chatting with our employee Anthony here the other day, you don't see very many longer form podcasts. Do you think that would be of interest to people? Do you think they would, zone out and get bored after 2 hours, 3 hours, or maybe it's something worth testing out?
Yeah, testing is going to be the answer, but I think it will boil down to, the audience and what they're after and how much depth and insight you can pull out, so I think Tim's got very good at interviewing, and he's got these like extreme guests, right? So and he's digging in to find out, the secrets of Arnold Schwarzenegger's success, and people want to hear that,
Yeah.
But ultimately it doesn't need to be interviewing like people like that. There's an art to interviewing, and making sure that you're getting insightful stuff out. And I think insight and depth is actually usually the missing factor in a lot of content, and what a long form content needs to have to keep people engaged. Because so much of what we're doing, even some of the stuff we've been talking about today that I've done, it's very quick hit. Right. A little dose of sugar. But, actually, if there's something people want to learn, like SEO in your podcast, or, I'm not sure how you sum up all the stuff that Tim Ferriss does, but productivity, success, is all kinds of things.
Yeah.
Then people want to know that. And yeah, I think there's almost like there's an opportunity for depth now. I think there is I feel there's a sense of saturation with a lot of content. One way to stand out is depth and insight. Yeah.
I'm considering it because, I schedule in the calendar an hour for all the interviews. But this one, and I interviewed a guy called Roberto Blake last night. That one also went an hour and 20 minutes. And I'm considering maybe trying some of this testing and going a little bit longer, seeing how people respond to that. But Mark, it's been fantastic having you on the show today. I appreciate you joining us on the wire, as I say. And Mark, hang on the line for 1 minute after I wrap things up here. But for everyone listening in, thank you for tuning in. Mark, tell us quickly where they can find you online.
It is at markjohnston.co, which is, my surname is spelled Johnstone, and that's .co, not .com and not .co.uk. I find myself saying that a lot, but it's .co.
We'll put in the show notes, .co. Awesome, Mark. Thank you, and stay on the line, and I'll see everyone on the next episode of Experts on the Wire.